All right, so I'm going to start with a quick note on how to navigate this course for the best success. So when you come into the course here, you'll come on the landing page, the home page. If you want to view the syllabus, you can click here and view the syllabus, which I go over in a separate video. But the best way to ensure that you get all the content and the information is you're going to come here to this modules tab. So you'll click on the modules, and from the very beginning, you can see all of the modules laid out for each week. And all you need to do is for each module is to click on this module overview page. And if you'll see, each one has a module overview page where everything is listed. And if you just click on this module overview tab, you will see that going in here, just right down the list is what you need to read, what you need to watch, and what you need to submit for the course. So if you just live on these module overview pages for week 1, I need to read chapter 1, I need to read chapter 2, then I need to watch these videos. These will obviously be linked once they're up. They're not up right now because I'm recording them as we speak, but there will be links here as well, and you just have to complete each of these. Again, just click on the link and it will take you to that assignment. All right. So if you live on these module overview pages, you just go down the list, you are absolutely going to be golden. And that's all you got to do. All right. So now let's actually dive into the topic of the day. And that is the more you know, the more you see, from McGeough Chapter 1, the Introduction to Visual Communication. This will be a pretty brief lesson video, as the introduction itself is relatively brief. Okay, so what does the more you know, the more you see mean? Take a moment to consider this magazine cover of LeBron James and Gisele Bundchen. What do you perceive of it? What do you think? Just take a moment to consider it and what you think. And while you're doing that, I want to mention that visual images never occur in isolation. So, it's just a magazine cover and it's just LeBron James, a famous basketball player, with a famous model, Gisele Bundchen, right? Okay, like that's it. But there's a lot of other cultural context you need to consider to understand why this was an extremely controversial image when it hit the newsstands for Vogue magazine. So visual communication is the study of that. It's the study of the use of visual symbols to create and share meaning among a group of people, among a society, among a culture, and fully understanding an image and why it can be controversial or why it can be popular or why it can be perceived a few ways requires you to recognize the cultural references that connect it to other pieces of visual communication in a culture's history. So now take a look at this magazine cover in relation to some other imagery from American history. So number 1, you have that King Kong poster of King Kong grabbing a helpless woman, and whatever might be his intentions there. Also consider on the right this piece of propaganda from World War II in depicting Germany as a mad brute that's coming across World War I, that's coming across the ocean to steal innocent American women. And then also consider the imagery that's existed within American history of depicting black people as primates or gorillas or something like that. And when you look at this, there's many sort of connections you can draw here, right? I mean, when you look at them and you consider them in context, you can understand how this magazine cover would have been so controversial at the time. And it certainly, or at least seemingly, was not intentional on the the part of the photographer or on Vogue magazine to present LeBron James in this way. But understanding visual communication means understanding how this connotation or this message could be subconscious. It could be of unintentionally drawn upon from the societal upbringing of that magazine editor, that photographer, on even LeBron and Giselle themselves, of thinking this is a way to present, a certain image. So, this is what we mean as far as the more you know, the more you see. Because if you don't know the background, if you don't know the history, you might be totally unaware of why this is problematic. And that's obviously something you want to know as a content consumer, but especially as a creator, because you don't want to unintentionally offend someone because you are not aware of how your message, your visual communication, sits within the greater visual communication of your culture. All right. So the book talks about these central processes of visual communication. And, you are probably all aware of these, but this is just to give them words, to give them vocabulary. So number one is sensing. All right. And sensing is what we normally think of when we say of like what you see. That's the result of light bounces off objects and goes into the eye itself, right? It comes in, you've got the rods, the cones. This isn't a science class, biology class or anything like that. So you don't need to know that process per se, but you obviously have, in order to perceive or to consume visual communication, you have to first bring it in. So vision is key to it. In that way, if you're blind, if you're visually disabled, you obviously have a huge barrier to visual communication. So visual communication assumes that people can sense sight. Number two is selecting. And selecting is you may think of it as a manual process that you are selecting, but our brain actually does the majority of the selecting for us. Your brain selects like what to focus on from all of the information that is bombarding us from all sides at all times. If we were to not have that ability from our brain to select the information, our heads would explode, because there's way too much stimulation in the world for us to be able to take in and not just totally shrivel up in a ball from all that information. So our brains make the choice of being like, hey, we're walking down the street right now. We're going to focus on perceiving that crack in that sidewalk so that we don't stumble over it. Or we're going to select the person walking down the street coming in our way with the dog that looks big and scary, so that we know we maybe want to like give them a little bit of extra space. So once we sense it, then our brain selects what we are going to focus on from all that information. And then lastly is perceiving. That is the process mentally of making a meaning out of the visual stimuli. That we sense the thing, we see the thing, and then we select whether to focus on it, and then perceiving is what we think about that thing. And why, if we see a dog that we think is scary, why do we think it is scary? What from our past leads us to believe? Did we have an experience from our past with a dog that looks similar or something of that nature? That's the part where really the study of the visual communication comes in, because we are the product of all the experiences that we have had in our lifetime, and how we perceive comes from us as individuals, us as our society, our family, our friends, any sort of thing, things we have read, movies we've seen, TV shows we've watched, that lead to how we perceive certain visual information. It's an ongoing process, okay? Like in the past, our memory and our experience, as I mentioned, strongly affect how we perceive, but it's not like, well, there's the past and now we're now and this is how we perceive it. It's an ongoing process. So for the present and the future, we're not just drawing on past memories. We're also creating new memories that are going to influence how we perceive not just the things now, but in the future, down the line. If we have a positive or a negative experience with some sort of visual communication, or not even the communication itself, where we are when we get this communication, those sorts of things, when you're on a beach, you see an image of a beach and someone relaxing, yes, a lot of it is built from, okay, like the beach is relaxing inherently, right? But you also draw upon the past memories of maybe you went to the beach with, your family, and you went in the water and you built a sandcastle and you sat there and, you drank a Coke and you just enjoyed the day. That influences how you perceive an image of a beach. And we're constantly building new experiences. If you go to a beach and, I don't know, your car gets broken into, that may in the future impact, when you see an image of a beach, you might no longer have that totally positive relationship with that image, because now in your mind you have that connection to the time your car got broken into. So why do we study this, right? Like, why is it important, right? It's a concept, right? We perceive some stuff. Our brain selects it for us. No big deal. I want you to understand there's a few things that go into visual literacy. And that's just, regardless of what your line of work is going to be, regardless of what you're going to do with your life. My hope with this course is that you develop that set of skills needed to interpret the content, to examine the social impact, to discuss the purpose, and be aware of the manipulative uses and ideological implications in visual communications, because you are being manipulated more than ever nowadays through your social media feeds, through all sorts of any type of media that's coming into your eyeballs, is manipulating you in a way. And it might not be intentionally aggressive. It might not be something that, someone is intentionally trying to cause you harm, but they're probably trying to sell you something, or to get you to watch their video, or something of that nature, to make you think something. And you need the tools as someone who understands visual communications to determine whether you want that information, whether you agree with that information, what you're going to do, the power of what you're going to do with that information. Because visual images, they influence what we buy, what actions we take, who we date, who we choose to associate it with, who we like and dislike, both in our personal lives, but also in the larger, what brands we like, what political figures we like, what our political beliefs are, what our values are, who and what we think is good, what we think is bad, not just, lawful or unlawful, but what we think is the right or the wrong thing is based on the communication that we receive. And then our interests, the fact that you like a certain sport or a certain type of music, believe it or not, that was not up to you. That was up to the information that came into your brain through your senses from certain people at certain times in your life that influence those sorts of things. So understanding those sorts of things is understanding the intertextuality, that you never perceive anything, especially visually, objectively. You always bring your own perspective. You always, take how you've been taught to read it. And you could have been taught from, your family, your friends, your community, your education, crazy uncle, anything. But you have biases. We all have biases. We all like to say we're unbiased. We're all incredibly biased. We all believe in ourselves and our view of the world. And understanding intertextuality and being visually literate understands that the way we perceive things may or may not be right. And it was influenced by something we learned or experienced along the way. And we are still being influenced and learning with new experiences along the way. So as I've mentioned before, if you think that you are, I am incredibly, visually literate, I am immune to any sort of propaganda or marketing or sales or any sort of material, you are very much susceptible to these things. However, if you understand, hey, I am a human being with a brain whose actions have been studied by marketers and advertisers and all these tech companies and about ways to influence me, and I realize I am and if you say I realize that I am susceptible to those sort of things and I need to figure out how to be conscious of them and battle those things, then you are going to be very much armed to go into this visual world and understand the things that are going on around you, and to figure out how you are going to consume them on your terms, not on someone else's terms. So that brings us to the end of today's of this week's lesson, or this chapter's lesson, excuse me. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out via email. But look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.